They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but they never tell you about the long, quiet nights spent waiting for that dish to freeze over in your own heart. They don't speak of the cold that seeps into your bones until you feel nothing but the goal ahead. I invite you to join me for a story of sweet pastries and a bitter debt, a story called Aura. The room is filled with the scent of butter and vanilla, a fragrance that should be the perfume of happiness. For me, it was once the scent of life itself. But today, as the afternoon sun streams through the large glass window of my bakery, Aura Pastries, catching the golden crust of 1,000 croissants, it carries the faint aftertaste of ash. The bell above the door chimes as a young couple walks in hand, their eyes lighting up at the display case. They don't know that the sweet foundations of this place were built upon the ruins of a family. The Vance family. And that ruin was a design of my own making. I offer them a smile, one I've practiced to perfection. But in my mind, I don't hear their order. I hear the dry rustle of contract papers and the voice of Corbin Vance, as smooth and cold as polished marble. That voice, after all these years, still haunts me in the quietest hours of the night. 12 years ago. I wasn't the owner of this bright, successful space. I was Annalise Vance, daughter-in-law to the Vance dynasty, a wife who loved her husband with a blinding devotion, and the soul who resurrected their failing bakery, the Vance hearth. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I was born with hands that knew how to speak to flour, sugar, and butter. I took their dusty, forgotten shop and turned it into the talk of the town. Every morning, a line would snake down the block for a taste of my signature Queen Ammon. A recipe that was my secret, alone. But in the grand, marble-floored house of the Vances, I was only a shadow. A useful one. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, was an artist of subtle contempt, a woman with platinum blonde hair always pinned in a perfect chignon. Her lips perpetually pursed as if she'd just tasted something sour. She never insulted my pastries. On the contrary, she would praise them effusively in front of their wealthy friends at dinner parties. Annalise's hands are simply magical, she would say, her gloved hand resting on my shoulder with the weightless touch one gives to furniture. She can turn simple flour and sugar into gold. Such a practical talent. The way she stressed the word practical was her dagger, a delicate reminder that I, with my humble origins, belonged in the kitchen. I was merely a useful tool for generating profit. She would never look me in the eye when she spoke. Her gaze would always drift over my shoulder to some expensive oil painting on the wall, as if I weren't quite solid enough to hold her attention. Her cruelty wasn't in her words, but in her omissions, in the way she made me feel invisible even as she placed me on display. And then there was Corbin, my father-in-law. He was the brain, the architect of my destruction. If Eleanor's cruelty was a cold fog, Corbin's was a blade of ice, a retired corporate lawyer. He was always impeccably dressed in tailored suits and had a habit of tapping his gold signet ring on the oak surface of his desk when issuing a directive. He never raised his voice. His menace was in his absolute calm. He could analyze your weaknesses with a polite smile, making you feel small and foolish for ever doubting him. Julian, my husband, existed in the space between them, a powerless buffer. I knew he loved me, but his was a fragile love, easily suffocated by the immense shadow of his parents. He craved their approval, and for it, he would sacrifice anything, including me, and I, with the patience of a baker waiting for dough to rise, endured it all. I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I brought them enough prestige and profit, they would one day see me. I believed Julian's love would be my shield. The naivety of love is its own beautiful tragedy. I didn't realize that to wolves, a sheep, even one that lays golden eggs, is still just a sheep. And they were merely waiting for the right moment to tear me apart. The trap was laid with perfect precision, disguised as an act of profound care. It began one autumn evening. The leaves outside Corbin's study window were a fiery red, the color of a warning I failed to heed. He had summoned me to his office, a room that smelled of leather, polished wood, and power. Julian was there too, standing behind his father's chair, nervously wringing his hands. "Annalise, sit," Corbin began, his voice as smooth as silk. His smile never reached his cold, gray eyes. "We need to talk about the future, this family's future." He started with praise, lauding how I had transformed the Vance hearth into the crown jewel of the town. Speaking of my extraordinary business acumen, each compliment was delivered with practiced skill, like layers of honey being spread over a razor's edge. I felt a rare warmth of pride bloom in my chest. I thought, finally, they see me. "And because you are so brilliant," he continued, leaning forward, "we must protect what you've built. The business world is a treacherous place. Annalise, taxes, liabilities, frivolous lawsuits, they can destroy everything overnight." He pushed a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the desk toward me. "This is a family trust, a brilliant legal structure. Essentially, it's a fortress. All major assets, the bakery, the house you and Julian share, will be placed inside it. They will belong to the trust, not to any individual. That way, they are untouchable, safe from any external threat." I stared at the dense pages of legal text. I was a baker, not a lawyer. I looked to Julian, searching for reassurance. His gaze darted away, fixing on the expensive Persian rug. "It's for the best. Annalise," he recited, the words sounding rehearsed. "Mom and Dad just want to protect our future. The future of our children." My heart softened at the mention of children. It was my deepest dream. A real family. Corbin, like a shark sensing blood, seized the opening. "Precisely," he said, tapping his signet ring on the desk. The sharp click echoed in the silence. "Eleanor and I will serve as the trustees. We have the experience. You and Julian will be the beneficiaries. You can simply focus on creating your wonderful pastries and living your lives. Leave the legal burdens to older, wiser heads." It sounded so reasonable, so safe, so thoughtful. I looked into Corbin's unreadable gray eyes and I willed myself to see trustworthiness, not emptiness. I bought into the fantasy of the fortress he was selling, never realizing it was being built to lock me out. My deep-seated desire for their acceptance clouded my judgment. "Do you need your own lawyer to look this over?" Corbin asked, a masterful move. He knew I didn't have one. The question wasn't an offer. It was a subtle test of loyalty. To hesitate would be to show distrust. "No, that won't be necessary," I said, my voice quiet. "I trust you. I trust this family." Julian let out a small, almost inaudible sigh of relief. It was a sound I would later recognize not as agreement, but as the release of a guilty man who had just dodged a bullet. Corbin smiled, the satisfied smile of a hunter whose prey has just walked calmly into the snare. He handed me a golden fountain pen. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. With a trembling finger, I signed my name on page after page, never knowing that each stroke of ink was a step down into my own personal hell. I had just handed them the keys to my life and locked myself out. That night, I lay awake, not with worry, but with a strange sense of elation. I felt I had finally crossed a threshold, that my signature was an oath of allegiance that had made me Irrevocably, a Vance. I turned to hug Julian. He was stiff for a moment before returning the embrace with a hollow gesture. "Everything's going to be okay now, right?" I whispered. "Of course," he said, his voice cracking at the end. He rolled over, turning his back to me, and pretended to sleep. I mistook his guilt for exhaustion. I didn't realize it was the cowardice of a man who couldn't bear to face his victim. The next morning, I walked to the bakery with a lightness in my step, my mind buzzing with ideas for a new lemon lavender tart. But when I tried to put my key in the lock, the door was opened from the inside. A stranger in a cheap suit blocked my path. "Can I help you?" he asked mechanically. "I'm Annalise Vance," I said, confused. "I own this bakery." The man consulted a clipboard. "According to my records, the owner of the Vance Hearth is the Vance Family Trust. And you, ma'am, are no longer an employee here. Your termination is effective immediately." The world tilted on its axis. A roaring sound filled my ears. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. "Where is my husband? Where is Julian?" And then I saw him. He was standing behind the pastry case, the very same one I polished every morning. He was standing next to his mother, Eleanor. She stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold indifference. Julian wouldn't look at me. His eyes were glued to his own expensive leather shoes. "Julian, what is going on?" My voice was a strangled cry. It was Eleanor who answered, her voice like shards of ice. "Everything is proceeding as planned. Annalise, the bakery is now protected. And we've decided it requires a change in staffing to move forward in a more professional direction." "Professional?" I repeated, incredulous. "I built this place with my own 2 hands." Julian finally looked up, and I saw the absolute vacancy in his eyes. There was no love, no remorse, only fear and obedience. He walked toward me, holding another set of papers. "I'm sorry. Annalise," he whispered, his voice trembling. He pushed the papers into my hand. "It's a divorce petition." I was paralyzed, fired, divorced. It was all happening so fast. I looked from Eleanor's impassive face to Julian's pathetic performance of anguish, and the pieces clicked into place. The trust, the safety, the future. It was all a lie. A meticulously crafted play to strip me of everything I had. "The house," I whispered. "The house also belongs to the trust," Eleanor said, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "And since you are no longer a member of the Vance family, you no longer have residency rights. Your belongings will be packed and sent to an address of your choosing." They had thought of everything, every single detail. They hadn't just taken my career and my home. They had legally and systematically erased me from their lives. I was evicted from my bakery, my house, and my family within 24 hours of signing their fortress of protection. Corbin, of course, was nowhere to be seen. The true masterminds never need to visit the crime scene. I could picture him in his study, tapping his signet ring on the desk, a faint smile on his lips. I stumbled backward, turning away from them. I walked out into the street as a light rain began to fall. The cold drops mingled with the hot tears streaming down my face. I had lost everything. But in that moment of absolute devastation, another feeling began to smolder deep within me. It wasn't sadness. It was a cold, profound rage. They had underestimated me. They thought I was just a naive baker. They didn't know that the same hands that could create sweetness and light could also be infinitely patient, waiting for the perfect moment for the yeast of vengeance to rise. The following weeks bled into a gray, numbing fog. Each morning, waking up on a friend's lumpy sofa, I had to suffer through the fresh agony of realizing that the nightmare was real. The betrayal stung more than the loss of property. The image of Julian, my Julian, handing me divorce papers was a film that played on a loop in my mind, each viewing more painful than the last. He wasn't just my husband. He was my world, and he had allowed it to be shattered. I would wander the streets, my path often taking me past the Vance hearth. They had already changed the sign to Vance and Sons Bakery, a bitterly ironic name, given their only son was a puppet. Through the window, I saw their new team of bakers attempting to replicate my creations. The pastries looked hollow, lifeless. They lacked the one ingredient no recipe can specify: passion. A bitter satisfaction warred with my despair. I tried to find work. But the Vances, with their power and influence, had poisoned the well. A carefully crafted story had been circulated, the tale of a greedy, untalented daughter-in-law who nearly ran the family legacy into the ground. Doors were closed in my face. I was an outcast, blacklisted from the very world I had once dominated. My meager savings dwindled. Thoughts of surrender crept in, leaving town, taking a menial job, forgetting I ever loved baking. There were nights I sat alone in the dark, wondering if it was worth it to keep fighting. They had won. They had utterly destroyed me. It was at my lowest point that an ember appeared in the darkness. His name was Elias, an old family friend who had known me since I was a girl. He owned a cozy, beloved Italian restaurant in the old part of town. The coincidence of his last name, Vance, felt like a small, strange wink from fate. One afternoon, as I sat in a cheap diner nursing a cold coffee, he walked in. He saw me, and his eyes held not pity, but a fierce knowing anger. "Annalise," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "I heard what happened. What a pack of bastards!" For the first time in weeks, I wept. Not tears of self-pity, but of relief. The relief of being seen, of being believed. I told him everything: the trust, the lies, the betrayal. He listened patiently, his kind face hardening into a grim mask. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "They took your bakery, child. But they can't take your gift. That is in here." He gently touched my hands. "And in here?" He tapped his heart. "But I have nothing." "Elias?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "No capital. No kitchen." Elias smiled. "I don't have much, but I have a kitchen. And a small, unused storage room in the back. It's not grand, but it's big enough for an oven and a table." I looked up, hope flickering within me for the first time. "I'll give you a small loan," he continued. "Enough for supplies and some basic equipment. No interest. Pay me back when you can. Show them, Annalise, show them they can put out a fire, but they can't kill a phoenix. A phoenix is reborn from the ashes." That night, sleep eluded me, but this time for a different reason. Elias's words had breathed life back into my hollowed-out soul. They had taken everything, but they had left me with the one thing that mattered: myself. And in the quiet of that borrowed room, a plan began to take shape. Not just a plan to survive, a plan to win. Aura Pastries was born in that moment, not of brick and mortar, but of resilience, and the quiet, simmering promise of revenge. The corner Elias gave me was, by any standard, humble. It barely fit a second-hand convection oven, a stainless steel table, and a few wire racks. There were no windows, and the air was perpetually thick with the scent of garlic and marinara sauce from the main kitchen. To me, it was a sanctuary, my kingdom. The first few months were a grueling battle. I rose at 3 a.m. when the city was still wrapped in a blanket of silence and stars. I walked to the restaurant in the pre-dawn chill, my hands numb. I kneaded every batch of dough by hand. There were no industrial mixers, no walk-in proofers, just me, my hands, and the dough. In that physical exertion, I found a strange kind of therapy. Every push, every fold, every slam of the dough onto the steel table felt like I was expelling a piece of the anger and hurt that had taken root inside me. I was kneading a new life. I named my fledgling brand Aura Pastries. An aura is an energy, a light that emanates from within. I wanted my pastries to have that, a soul, a radiance that no machine could replicate. I started small, classic croissants, pain au chocolat, and jewel-like fruit tarts. Elias let me place a small, glass display case near the entrance of his restaurant. My first customers were his regulars, buying out of loyalty to him. But then they came back. And they brought their friends. They came back for the taste. Word of mouth became my marketing campaign. The girl at Elias's place makes croissants that are better than the Vance's used to be. Her tart crust is impossibly flaky. Soon, people were coming to the restaurant not just for pasta, but specifically to buy my pastries. The little display case was selling out by noon every day. I worked relentlessly, fueled by coffee and a burning desire to prove them wrong. Some days, I survived on 3 hours of sleep. My body ached, but my mind was sharper than ever. I was no longer the weeping, broken Annalise. Every pastry sold was a brick in my new foundation. Every dollar earned was a bullet in my arsenal. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Vance & Sons Bakery. As I had predicted, it was failing. Eleanor, in her arrogance, believed that a brand and a recipe were all that mattered. They hired expensive bakers, but they were mercenaries, not artisans. They lacked the obsessive attention to detail, the love that I had poured into my work. Their quality plummeted while their prices rose. Their loyal customer base began to erode, and many of them found their way to my little glass case. One evening, Julian showed up at the back door of the restaurant. He looked thin and haunted. "Annalise," he said, his voice strained. "I heard you're doing well." I said nothing, focusing on wiping down my steel table. "The bakery, it's struggling," he admitted. "My mother, she doesn't understand. She thinks everything can be bought." "And she bought your silence," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as the table beneath my hands. I didn't look up. Julian flinched. I had no choice. You don't know the pressure I was under." "Oh, but I do," I said, finally raising my eyes to meet his. "I understand perfectly. You chose a golden cage over freedom. That was your choice, Julian. Now live in it." I turned my back on him and continued my work. He lingered for another moment, a ghost, at the feast of my new life, then shuffled away into the night. I felt no pity. I felt no triumph. I felt nothing at all. He was simply a relic from a past I was determined to bury. I had work to do. My empire was just beginning. And the final objective was now, finally, in sight. 2 years passed in what felt like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. Each day was a testament to sweat, flour, and an unyielding will. From that tiny corner kitchen, Aura Pastries had grown into a phenomenon. The single display case had become a full-fledged bakery of my own, right next door to Elias's restaurant. On opening day, I didn't send an invitation to the Vances. They didn't need one. The whole town was my messenger. My shop was perpetually packed, a vibrant hub of warmth and delicious smells, while Vance & Sons Bakery grew quieter and more desolate by the day. But a single successful shop wasn't enough. To execute the final phase of my plan, I needed more than local fame. I needed power. I began a strategic expansion, supplying my pastries to high-end cafes, boutique hotels, and corporate offices across the state. I launched a sleek website with mouth-watering photography. I told my story, not the story of betrayal, but the story of a woman who rebuilt her life from scratch on the foundation of her passion. It resonated. Aura Pastries became more than a brand. It became a symbol of resilience. I had long since paid back my loan to Elias, but he remained my mentor and closest confidant. He taught me the ruthless language of business. The very language Corbin had assumed was beyond my comprehension. Never let emotion cloud a financial decision. Annalise, he'd often say, his eyes serious. Be as cold as your former father-in-law, but use that coldness to protect what you love, not to destroy others. And I learned. I devoured market analyses, scrutinized financial reports, and negotiated with suppliers like a seasoned pro. The artist in me learned to dance with the businesswoman. I was no longer the naive girl who took people at their word. Every contract I signed, every move I made, was calculated. While my empire rose, the Vances crumbled. They made the classic mistake of the arrogant. They underestimated their opponent. Desperate, they took out massive loans to renovate their failing bakery, hiring expensive consultants who couldn't fix the fundamental problem. The soul was gone. The soul was me. Their debt mounted. The bank grew impatient. I watched their decline from a distance, using a network of industry contacts I had carefully cultivated. I knew when they missed a payment. I knew when the warning letters started arriving. I knew they were drowning. And I knew my moment had come. One evening, I sat with Elias in my small office, the scent of cooling bread wafting in from the bakery. Spread across my desk were Aura's glowing financial statements and, more importantly, the public filings on the loans taken out by Vance and Sons Bakery. They're in deep, I said, pointing to a figure circled in red. The building itself, their precious legacy, is the primary collateral. Elias looked at me, his gaze steady. Are you ready, child? I nodded, a cold certainty settling in my heart. It's time. Elias, it's time to buy back my past. The plan was simple in its concept, but brutal in its execution. I couldn't be the face of it. The Vances would rather burn their bakery to the ground than sell it to me. We needed a front. I have a friend, Elias said. An investor from the next city over. He owes me a favor. We'll form a shell corporation, a ghost investment firm, with him as the face. This firm will approach the bank and offer to buy the Vances' entire delinquent loan. Will the bank agree? I asked. Elias chuckled. They'll be thrilled. To them, it's a toxic asset. Getting it off their books, even at a discount, is a win. Once we acquire the debt, we become their new creditor. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was perfect. We weren't just buying a building. We were buying control over their fate. And then, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. And then, Elias said, his voice low and serious, you offer them a way out, an offer to purchase the bakery outright, an offer that is meticulously calculated to be just enough to pay off their debt to our company, plus the other personal debts we know they have. It will leave them with nothing. Annalise, exactly as they left you. I looked out the window at the glowing neon sign that read Aura. I had been reborn from the ashes. Now it was time to return, not to set a fire, but to collect what was mine and let them suffocate in the ashes of their own greed. The plan unfolded with the quiet, sterile precision of a surgical procedure, the Shell Corporation. Elias Capital Ventures was established overnight. Elias's friend, a stone-faced investor named Marcus, played his part to perfection. He was the embodiment of everything Corbin Vance respected and feared. A man who spoke only in numbers and cared only for the bottom line. Marcus approached the bank. As Elias predicted, they practically gift-wrapped the Vance's loan and handed it over. For the bank, it was a way to clean up a messy, non-performing asset. Within a month, the legal ownership of the Vance's debt was transferred to Elias Capital Ventures. It was now in my hands. The Vances were oblivious. All they knew was that a formal letter arrived, informing them that their loan was now held by a private investment firm. The news must have terrified them. A large bank can be negotiated with, but a private equity firm is a shark. The pressure intensified immediately. I imagined the sleepless nights in that cold, marble house. Corbin, the self-proclaimed financial genius, being outmaneuvered in his own game. Eleanor, who had always viewed money as something beneath her, now facing the prospect of having none. And Julian, surely trapped in a hell of his own making, torn between his guilt and his fear of his parents' wrath. The next phase began. Elias Capital Ventures tightened the noose. Formal letters demanding immediate payment of arrears were sent. Warnings of foreclosure proceedings were issued. Each letter was a masterpiece of cold, unforgiving, legal prose, using the very language Corbin had once wielded like a weapon. When their desperation was at its peak, we delivered the final, calculated blow. Marcus, on behalf of the firm, sent them a humanitarian offer. The firm would purchase the bakery and the brand outright. The offer price was calculated down to the last cent. It was just enough for them to pay back their debt to Elias Capital Ventures and settle a few other outstanding personal loans we had uncovered. It would leave them with zero profit. It would only offer them an escape from total ruin and bankruptcy. They took the bait, cornered and with no other options. They agreed. A final meeting was scheduled to sign the closing papers. The location: Corbin Vance's own home office, the very room where I had signed away my life 2 years prior. I would not attend, not until the end. Marcus would go as my proxy. On the day of the closing, I sat in my own office at Aura Pastries, my phone on the desk before me. I couldn't work. I just stared at it, waiting. Every second stretched into an eternity. I pictured the scene: Corbin, fighting to maintain his last shred of dignity as he signed away his family's legacy. Eleanor, sitting in stony, arrogant silence, betrayed only by the trembling of her hands. Julian, a ghost in the room, his presence barely registered. At 3:15 p.m., the phone rang. It was Marcus. "It's done," he said, his voice flat. "They've signed. The Vance hearth is officially ours." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Any suspicions?" "None. They're just relieved to be out of debt." Corbin even tried to give me advice on how to run the place. It was pathetic. "Now," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. "Do as we discussed. Tell them the new owner wants to meet them, immediately, at the bakery." "Understood," Marcus replied. And the line went dead. I stood up and put on a sharply tailored blazer. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the girl who had been cast out. Her eyes were calm, resolute, and tinged with ice. I wasn't going to seek revenge. I was going to collect a debt. I walked out of my bakery, hailed a cab, and gave the driver the address. The address of what was once my home, my career, and my heart. The Vance hearth. The cab pulled up to the curb in front of the Vance hearth. I didn't get out right away. I sat for a moment, just looking at the place that held so much of my history, both glorious and painful. The Vance and Sons bakery sign looked tired, the paint beginning to peel. Only a handful of customers were inside. It was a hollow shell, its soul long gone. I took a deep, steadying breath, opened the door, and stepped onto the sidewalk. The click of my heels on the pavement was a drumbeat, steady and determined. I pushed open the door. The little bell chimed, the same sound that had once been the music of my life. This time, it announced not the baker, but the queen returning to reclaim her kingdom. The three of them were standing behind the counter, talking to Marcus. They all turned as the bell rang, and then they saw me. A silence fell over the shop so thick and heavy, it felt like it could shatter the display glass. I will carry the memory of their expressions to my grave. Eleanor's face was first. The mask of smug composure froze, cracked, and then disintegrated. Her eyes widened, disbelief warring with a dawning, sickening horror as the truth began to land. Her thin lips parted, but no sound came out. Corbin, the old fox, tried to maintain his composure, but the shock betrayed him. The color drained from his face, and a muscle twitched in his jaw. His eyes darted from me to Marcus and back to me again. The gears in his brilliant mind were spinning furiously, connecting the dots. And when they finally connected, a flash of pure, undiluted hatred lit his cold eyes. And Julian, oh, Julian. His face was a tragic canvas of terror, regret, and utter helplessness. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. The ghost of the wife he had thrown away, now returned not as a supplicant, but as a judge. I walked slowly toward them, saying nothing. I let the silence do its work, let the impossible truth settle in their minds. I took a slow tour of the bakery, my fingers gliding over the cool surface of the counter, my eyes taking in the sad, lifeless pastries within. Finally, I stopped directly in front of them. Marcus gave me a subtle nod and stepped back, ceding the stage. "Hello," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "It looks like this place could use a few changes." Corbin found his voice first, though it was raspy with rage. What did you do? Elias Capital Ventures? That was you? A clever move, wouldn't you say? Father, I replied, deliberately using the old title, letting it drip with irony. I learned from the best. Always protect your assets in a fortress. Only this time, you were the ones left on the outside. Eleanor's hand shot out, her finger trembling as she pointed at me. You, Viper! You tricked us! Tricked you? I let out a short, mirthless laugh. Did I hand you a stack of papers and call it family protection? Eleanor? Did I promise you a secure future and then throw you out on the street the next day? No. I did everything in the open market. I acquired your debt. You defaulted. I made an offer. You accepted. It's called business. A word you were always so fond of, wasn't it? Corbin? I turned my gaze to Julian. He shrank back, as if my eyes could physically burn him. Annalise, He stammered. Don't. I cut him off. Just don't. You had your chance to speak 2 years ago. You chose silence. Please, continue. I faced all three of them again. Under the terms of the acquisition, I am the new owner of this establishment. And my first business decision, as the owner, I paused, letting the words hang in the air as I met each of their eyes, is to terminate your employment. All three of you. Effective immediately. Please collect your personal belongings and leave the premises. The silence returned, thick with the stench of failure and humiliation. They had been beaten at their own game, destroyed by the very tactics they had so ruthlessly employed against me. The initial shock gave way to impotent fury. Corbin, the man who was always in control, looked like he might have a stroke. You can't do this, he roared, the first time I had ever seen him lose his composure. This is the Vance family legacy. It has our name on it. It had your name on it, I corrected gently. But a name doesn't pay the bills. Corbin, you sold it. And as for the proceeds from the sale, I glanced at Marcus, who was holding another file. Marcus stepped forward. As per the agreement, the funds from the purchase of the bakery have been transferred directly to Elias Capital Ventures to satisfy the outstanding debt. After that debt was cleared, the remaining balance, he flipped a page, was $17,428. What? Eleanor shrieked. That's impossible. This bakery is worth millions. It was worth millions when I was here, I said. After 2 years under your professional management, its value had depreciated considerably. Add to that the mountains of debt you accrued. That figure is quite generous, I continued, giving them no quarter. And that remaining balance, we have also thoughtfully taken care of for you. It has been used to pay off your outstanding personal credit card debt, your car loans, and a few delinquent medical bills. Luckily for you, it was just enough. Down to the penny. I smiled, a cold, sharp thing. So, to summarize, you are now debt-free. You are also penniless. You will walk out of here with nothing. Exactly as I did 2 years ago. It seems fair, don't you think? The finality of it hit them like a physical blow. They hadn't just lost the bakery. They had lost everything. Their house would be next. Their luxury cars would be repossessed. Their entire way of life was over. Eleanor sank onto a stool, her face a ghastly shade of gray. Corbin stood frozen, his eyes vacant. He was utterly defeated, not just financially, but intellectually. The self-proclaimed grandmaster of the game had been checkmated by a pawn he had sacrificed long ago. Julian finally found his voice, but it was the voice of a beggar. Annalise, please, don't do this to my parents. They're old. I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something akin to pity. Not for him, but for the boy inside him who had never been allowed to grow up, who had never learned to stand on his own. My pity died the day you handed me divorce papers. Julian, I said, my voice devoid of heat, filled only with a vast weariness. I'm not doing this to them. They did this to themselves. This isn't revenge. This is equilibrium. It's karma. You reap what you sow. I gestured to Marcus. 2 security guards we had on standby entered the shop. Please escort the Vances from the property, I said. Ensure they take only their personal effects. Eleanor began to sob, ugly, gasping sounds of despair. Corbin said nothing, simply allowing himself to be led away like a broken man. Julian was the last to leave. As he passed me, he paused. I always loved you, Annalise, he whispered. One last, desperate gambit. I looked him straight in the eye. No, Julian, you never loved me. You loved what I provided. Warmth, success, security. But when it came to a choice between love and fear, you chose fear. And that is why you will always be alone. He bowed his head and walked out. The door chimed shut behind him, closing a chapter of my life. I stood alone in the center of the bakery, my bakery. The silence was absolute. There was no great swell of triumph, no cheering in my head, just a profound quiet, an emptiness. The debt was paid. Justice was served. But what had it cost me? Who had I become in the process? I looked at my reflection in the glass of the pastry case. I saw a strong, successful, and solitary woman. The war was over, but the battle inside me, perhaps, had just begun. I spent the rest of that afternoon alone in the bakery. I didn't call my staff or start making renovation plans. I just sat in the silence, letting the memories wash over me. I remembered the early days, Julian and I painting these very walls, laughing, our hands smeared with paint. I remembered the pure joy of pulling a perfect batch of croissants from the oven. This place wasn't just a business, it was a piece of my soul that had been stolen and now returned. Scarred, but whole. The victory didn't taste sweet. Like my pastries, it had a complex flavor profile, the bitterness of loss, the salt of tears, and the sour tang of regret. I had my justice, but I couldn't get back the 2 years I'd lost or erase the scar of betrayal. As evening fell, Elias arrived. He brought a bottle of good wine and 2 glasses. He didn't speak at first, just sat with me, pouring the wine and sliding a glass toward me. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly. "Empty," I confessed. "I thought I would feel ecstatic, vindicated. I just feel tired." Elias nodded, taking a slow sip of wine. "That's because the fight is over. Annalise, when a soldier comes home from war, he doesn't celebrate right away. He needs time to heal. You fought a hard war. Now, it's time to rest and find your peace." "I'm afraid I became like them," I whispered. "Cold. Calculating." "No," Elias said firmly. "There is a world of difference. They acted out of greed and arrogance to destroy an innocent person. You acted for justice, to reclaim what was yours. You used their weapons against them, but your cause was righteous. Never forget that." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the streetlights flicker on. I knew he was right. This journey hadn't turned me into a monster. It had forged me into a survivor. And now, as my story comes to a close, I'd like to talk to you, the one who has patiently listened to it all. Thank you for walking with me through this long and emotional journey. Perhaps while listening, you felt outrage at the Vance's cruelty. And perhaps you felt a sense of satisfaction when they finally faced the consequences. Those feelings are valid. But when the dust settles, what I hope you see is more than a simple revenge story. The Vances weren't destroyed by me. They were destroyed by their own character flaws. Corbin was defeated by his intellectual arrogance. Eleanor was undone by her classist pride. And Julian was left behind by his own cowardice. Their greed and cruelty created an enemy they never saw coming. And in the end, it consumed them. That is the true nature of karma. It's not a mystical force, but the logical outcome of our own actions. For me, the real victory wasn't the moment I fired them. The real victory was that first morning I woke up in Elias's back room and decided to knead that first batch of dough. It was every brick I laid in the foundation of Aura Pastries with my own 2 hands. True strength isn't about never getting knocked down. It's about how you get back up, stronger and wiser than before. My story is a testament to the fact that your worth is never defined by what others take from you, but by what you build for yourself. Never let another person's cruelty become the narrative of your life. You can be hurt, you can be broken, but as long as you hold on to your own passion and belief in yourself, you can always be reborn. Justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes, the best justice is the life you build, in defiance of those who tried to tear you down. That is my story. I would be truly honored to hear your thoughts on this journey. Do you think I did the right thing? Was there another path? Please, leave a comment below. Your perspective is a gift. And if this story resonated with you, your support for the channel allows us to continue sharing meaningful stories like this one. Thank you so much for listening.